All right, so any one of you who's interested in human psychology, let me tell you an interesting fact about that. Our brain is an interesting machine, right? When faced with challenges, it automatically builds boundaries around it and try to solve the problem within that boundary. Now it's up to us how creative we are to expand that boundary or to break that boundary or how narrow we want to get into that, right? Education certainly helps, but it's not just getting the education. It's the way of teaching, it's the way of learning. There's so many different ways that now people can learn. And there's so many great initiatives that are going on around how to make sure that the person who is learning gets the point, right? And that's why we have our keynote speaker around education as well today. But to start that keynote session, I would like to invite the moderator for that session, who is the CEO and the chief data scientist for a data science dojo company. Please put your hands together for Raja Iqbal.
Okay, so I will, before I bring in the next, our guest, I would like to start with maybe sort of an anecdote, right? So I also teach for a living, but the way I teach is it's more face-to-face, in person, right? So I've trained 7,000 or 8,000 people, machine learning and AI in a face-to-face setting, right? So I've been doing this for quite some time. I'm also an educator at heart, so I absolutely enjoy teaching. Some people, they say, if you exit your startup, what are you going to do? I'll probably go back and teach math or physics at high school, right? So that's what my passion is, right? So when I teach, when you're teaching AI and machine learning, so it is almost inevitable, right? So you are going to bump into calculus, linear algebra, and all of that. And then, so everyone wants to actually learn AI and machine learning. They want to build models. But when it comes to the underlying math part of it, hey, I mean, this is not fun, right? And then you realize I've found, like, out of this 7,000 or 8,000 people that I've taught, I've found very few who had the foundations right. The foundations are broken. I mean, I can tell you, I mean, it's a big enough sample. These are smart people working for big companies, like, I mean, talking about Microsoft and Amazon and Facebooks of the world. These people are good. They are good at what they do. But when it comes to the foundation, it is broken. So, so they asked me to introduce my next speaker. I said, hey, how do I introduce my speaker? Because, I mean, everyone knows him, right? So what do I mean, should I just go through that list of he has done this, this, and this? So how many of you, let's actually see, how many of you have used or heard of Khan Academy, right? So like, I would be surprised if you have not heard of it, right? So I was telling my wife, and she's a high school math teacher, and she was excited, right? I mean, so you're going in because she uses Khan Academy with her students. And then my daughter, high school student, and I told her, I mean, she's also, she was excited, right? So I will not introduce Sal Khan. All of you know him, right? So there's no point introducing Sal Khan. So please, a huge, huge round of applause for Sal Khan. Sal, please. So I think you have gone through this like maybe millions of times already, right? So how did all of this start? I mean, if you don't mind just getting started.
No, and yeah, I just don't. Some of y'all know the story of how this happened, so I'll give the medium version of it. But yeah, you rewind. I originally, my career started in tech, then the .com bubble bursts. I take refuge in business school. After business school, I find myself, I was working at a small hedge fund in Boston at the time. And in 2004, I got married, and I had my family from Louisiana, which you apparently now live pretty close to where my mom lives now. They were visiting me up in the Northeast, and it just came out of conversation. My 12-year-old cousin Nadia was having trouble in math. I offered to tutor her when she goes back remotely, however we could pull it off. And it was difficult at first. She had really lost her self-esteem, but slowly but surely she got caught up. She was being placed into a slower math track in 7th grade because of that. And I called up her school. I said, I really think Nadia Rahman should be able to retake this placement exam. They said, who are you? I said, I'm her cousin. And they surprisingly let her retake that test. And then I was hooked. I started teaching her younger brothers, Arman and Ali. So those were kind of the first 3 students of Khan Academy. And I saw a common pattern. Well, first of all, word spreads in my family, free tutoring's going on. Before I know it, 10, 15 cousins, family, friends all over the country I'm tutoring after markets closed for my hedge fund job. And I saw a pattern that, just as you were just mentioning, that the reason they were having difficulty wasn't because they weren't bright, wasn't because they didn't have good teachers, wasn't because they weren't trying. It was because they had gaps that in a traditional system, there was no really easy way for them to address. The class just keeps moving on. If you get a 70% on a test, that 30% you don't know, it just keeps accumulating. And that's not to even mention the stuff you might forget. And so I started writing just kind of fun software for them. And that was what I called Khan Academy. The domain name was available. It was a fun project. I did think in the back of my mind that, hey, maybe this could be something that could scale. Like, as we're amongst entrepreneurs, I had found product market fit amongst my cousins. So I said, well, maybe there could be something bigger here. And then in 2006, a friend we had moved out here, and a friend, his name's Zuli, have to give him credit, and he said, hey, Sal, this is all cool, this software, and you're tutoring all these cousins, but how are you scaling your lessons? And I said, yes, it's hard to do even with 15 cousins what I was doing with just Nadia. And he said, well, why don't you record some videos for them, upload it onto YouTube, and and y'all have heard me say this many times, but it's true. I said, YouTube's for cats playing piano. It's not for serious math. But I gave it a shot anyway. And long story short, my cousins told me they liked me better on YouTube than in person. And and then people who frankly weren't my cousins were starting to use it. And then that just kept growing. I was getting letters every day. And by 2007, 2008, there were about 50 or 100,000 folks who were using it. Pretty regularly, and by 2008, I set it up as a not-for-profit with a mission: free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Even then, I thought I was going to stay at my hedge fund job for probably at least another 5, 10 years until I could achieve some wealth, maybe, and then do something like this on my own terms. But events kind of took over. I had trouble focusing on my day job, and in 2009, I took the leap and tried to start it up as a real not-for-profit in 2009, 2010.
Yeah, that's great. So I will use that as a segue, right? So the mission is to provide free world-class education to anyone, anywhere, right? And you have a background, like as a hedge fund analyst, and you have an MBA, right? So like going to something from like hedge fund analyst to a free world-class education for anyone, from anyone, anywhere, for anyone, anywhere, right? So, and then and you quit your job, right? So what were you thinking? I mean, what was going on?
Yeah. No, my wife, not my wife, my mother called me and said, what were you thinking? What are you thinking? But my wife was very supportive. I guess there was a couple of things here. In 2007, I did get, we're living out here in Silicon Valley. I know many of y'all. And some folks come out of the woodwork saying, hey, it looks like you're hitting some traction. Can we, we'll invest. And you could quit your day job and you can turn this as a for-profit. And clearly I have nothing against for-profit. I worked in perhaps the most, the hedge fund job is pretty much only for-profit. And then, sitting in the middle of Silicon Valley. So I entertained it. But I think, there was something interesting about in those meetings when you start saying, okay, well, how are you going to monetize this? How are you going to, and you immediately go to some type of a paywall, some type of a freemium offering, or some type of advertising. And in this space, in education, just the mental model of there's, I was getting letters from like people all over the world, people who are deployed in the military, poor kids in Africa, it was wild stuff. And I was just thinking, well, if we put a paywall, 90% of those people are not going to be able to access it. And so, to some degree, I was a little bit, I had the for-profit hat from my hedge fund day job, but I also am a big fan of science fiction. And I've always been, the hedge fund day job, it was just like, okay, what's quarterly earnings going to be? And so you're very short-term focused. But my science fiction hat said, I was always inspired by, I don't know how many read Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. In Foundation series, it's 30,000 years in the future. Humanity has colonized the galaxy. And there's a academic, his name is Harry Seldon. And he's able to, it's like kind of statistics and psychology and economics combined. And he's able to predict large-scale historical movements. And he's able to see that the galactic empire, even though it looks stable, is about to decline. And it's going to be a 10,000-year dark ages. So it's 10,000 years of war and famine and lost knowledge. and he decides to do something about it. So he sets up a foundation that has all of the galaxy's knowledge and sets it up at the periphery of the galaxy to shorten the dark ages. And when I first read that in 7th grade, I remember thinking like, wow, how epic is that to think on that time scale, to kind of think well beyond anything that you might be up to. And also a big aha for me in 7th grade when I read that was, society isn't built on the structures of the military. It's built on what's going on in people's minds. So, that's Harry Seldon's like, no, if we just preserve the knowledge, then the galaxy will be preserved, whatever happens to the infrastructure and whatever else. So that was always in the back of my mind. And so, a thought experiment I had when I was starting Khan Academy is like, okay, what does a home run look like in the for-profit, and what does a home run look like in the not-for-profit? And a home run in the for-profit, we all know the, Googles and Microsofts, whatever we can name it. That's great. I'm definitely not against money, so I wouldn't have minded that. And those organizations have real impact. I also don't want to discount that, real impact. But then, well, what's a home run in the not-for-profit? Well, what if this very nascent Khan Academy thing could be like a Smithsonian or an Oxford that could last for many, many generations and could serve, maybe billions of folks. And I'll say one last thing and I'll stop talking, which is, in real space, you have infrastructure, you have companies, and you have institutions. The institutions are the hospitals, the libraries, the museums. The internet, obviously you have the infrastructure, it's a virtual space, and there's companies, but where are the institutions? Where are the things that actually help hold up and keep the civic dialogue? And at that time when I was starting, Wikipedia had started, and I'm like, okay, that's kind of an institution. I was inspired by MIT OpenCourseWare at the time. A lot of universities were trying to monetize the internet, but MIT took a principled stance and say, no, we're going to spend our own money and actually just share this content. And so a little bit of me just said, hey, why not? Why not try to swing for the fences and see if Khan Academy could be another institution here that could help, up-level what's going on the internet and hopefully in the world.
That's great. So, if I remember correctly, this was 2008, right? So when and this was about 4 years before Coursera was even founded, right? So, and when I looked up, right, so internet bandwidths at that time were like 10 to 100 times slower, right? So in many countries still, right? So, like, did you have anything in mind, right? So, I mean, is it even feasible, right? So, because the edtech, the way we see it now, so you were using maybe a very earlier primitive version of, Wacom tablets? Sorry, I don't know what was
tablet,
your. Yeah. So, and now, I mean, your tablets have improved. Because I'm in edtech, I mean, I do virtual training, so I mean, I can see all the challenges, right? So did you foresee anything, right? So because you were ahead of time, right? So, I mean, because edtech had not improved that much at that time. So once again, it was just your passion that kept you going, or you thought that things will improve? I mean, so because you have a background in technology, you have, so.
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think there's a what keeps you going, and then like what do you try to build for. I think the thing it's funny when I in the late '90s I had joined a startup. At the ripe age of 22, I was the CTO of a startup in San Francisco, and it went well. I mean, some of y'all might remember it was called MeVC back in 1999. And it was doing well, but then you could imagine when NASDAQ collapsed, we had grown to 40 people, and then it started to become like Survivor, right? Who's going to be laid off that week? And I remember thinking it was a super exciting experience on the way up, and it was one of the most horrible experiences I ever had on the way down. And I was lucky; I was able to go take refuge at business school, but there were people with families and careers who were getting laid off, and it was a tough economic environment. And I told myself back then that I just don't have the mentality to be an entrepreneur, that it's just too much emotional trauma to go through that type of a roller coaster. So I said, let me go to business school, figure out what other things. I found out I liked finance. And it is one of these things that even though you tell yourself, you still keep getting drawn to the same things. I was like, oh, let me do something safe. I'll go work at a hedge fund. And then I ended up going work at a one-person hedge fund. I was the second employee. So I kept getting drawn to it, but I was like, but I'm not an entrepreneur. I can't do this startup thing. I can't do this tech thing. I saw how bad it was. And so the way I protected this project that I was doing with my family, and I was writing software, from the outside, it had some of the trappings of a startup, of an early stage startup. I said, this is a family project. Even if I'm able to impact my family directly, that makes it worth it. And if it helps other people, that's great. All my business school friends, hey, Sal, how are you going to monetize this? I was like, nope, nope, this is not a startup. Don't ask me all these cynical questions. This is just a thing for my family. And, and so that's what kept me going, is just take the small steps, but every now and then think some of these delusional big foundation series type of visions and keep those thoughts at the same time. In terms of, how does something as, 2008, I'm doing very basic YouTube videos, basic software. How do you go from something like that to free world-class education for anyone, anywhere? And even then, it was clear, though, that the trends were, even though at that time and still, not everyone had access to the internet or bandwidth, the adoption curves were faster than almost any other technology and continue to be faster than almost any technology. So, it felt pretty clear that if we could build the infrastructure, the ways for people to get all the knowledge, all the practice, and eventually the credentials, which is something we're working on now, where you can actually get credit for the work on Khan Academy, that, the Wayne Gretzky skate to where the puck is going, it's in 10 or 15 years, which is now, or 10 years beyond that, it will be pretty
So
common.
did you see the puck going that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it's you have to be a Nostradamus to say in 2008 that by say 2028, most of the world will have fairly low cost access to some form of internet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So one more question about the early days, then we'll move on to the present, right? So you quit your job,
Yeah.
and you had a newborn around that time as
Yes.
well, right? So, and then it must be stressful, right? And then you did not have any source of income except donations. And then your Bill Gates and Andor, they were the earliest supporters, right? So can you tell us, how did they find out? What happened?
Yeah, it's fascinating. I took the most, people sometimes ask me, how do you market and all this? I took the most naive approach possible. I said, I'm just going to keep making videos, keep writing software, and hope people notice. That's all I did. And, I think any entrepreneur, you have to start with a little bit of delusional optimism. Surely the world will recognize that what you're doing is worth supporting or investing in or whatever you're doing. So yeah, it was fall of 2009. I quit my day job. We had saved enough money. It was essentially going to be for a down payment on a house, which even in 2009 was not a joke out here. But we could afford to live off of it for maybe a year, and without it not being a down payment anymore. Our first son had just been born, and my wife was in residency and doing her fellowship, and so she was making a little bit of money through that. But yeah, I think you give yourself a year, but you expect that in 3 months, surely. I was already starting to talk to a few philanthropists, and they seemed interested. But I think what happens to a lot of entrepreneurs, whether social entrepreneur or for-profit, you get a lot of no's that you didn't expect to get in that first. And then if you fast forward about 6 to 9 months in it, I can joke about it now, but it was incredibly stressful. It was, I would wake up in the middle of the night, I'd look at my wife, my kids sleeping, I'm like, we're digging into our savings about $5,000-$6,000 a month, and you really wonder what you just did, and especially it was especially hard because there was no conventional track. It's not like I could point to 2 or 3 other people who had quit their job to start a not-for-profit in education that leverages technology. We knew some people in this room that had done the same thing on a for-profit, and so yeah, it was bad. I won't sugarcoat it. But slowly but surely, one day I got we were getting a few $100s in donations, and then one day a $10,000 donation came in. I see who that was. Her name's Ann Doerr. I recognize the last name, and I said, hey Ann, this is the largest donation we've ever gotten. If we were physical school, you would now have a building named after you. And Ann said, hey, I've been using your stuff with my kids, myself. I had all these videos about the financial crisis, so a lot of adults were using it as well. And we ended up having a lunch at a Indian buffet restaurant in downtown Palo Alto, and she said, what's your goal? And I said, free world-class education. I showed her the software. I showed her how the usage was growing. I used to walk around with a notebook of all the testimonials, people who were just saying how it helped them. And Ann said, so how are you supporting yourself? And I said, in the most proud way possible, I'm not. And she kind of processed that. I go home, and she famously sent me a text message, you really need to be supporting yourself. I've just wired you $100,000. And so that was a good day, a little bit. And then honestly, it just got crazier and crazier from then. A month later, I'm running a summer camp because I never viewed virtual as a replacement for physical. I always viewed virtual as something that could, well, one, it could be a safety net if you have nothing else, but also it could liberate what happens in the physical. If you have something like Khan Academy, do you have to give lectures anymore? Do the kids have to be quiet? No, they should interact. They should do games, simulations. They should tutor each other. So I was doing that at summer camp. I was actually at a trading floor of a bunch of 7th graders. Trading securities on a simulation, and I started getting text messages from Ann, which I now took very seriously. And they said, Ann said, I'm at the Aspen Ideas Festival. I'm in the main pavilion. Bill Gates on stage, last 5 minutes talking about Khan Academy. So I didn't know what to make of this. I immediately kick a 7th grader off of a computer, and I start looking for this thing. And I found it, and it was, it was just like this, Walter Isaacson interviewing Bill Gates, and open question just says, hey, Bill, so what are you excited about these days? Completely open question. And y'all could look it up. After this, go look at it. I mean, I still get a couple of goosebumps when I think about me in that moment, seeing that video. But Bill just starts going, oh, yeah, there's this website, Khan Academy. There's this one guy. He used to be a hedge fund analyst, and his wife let him go. I mean, he knew the story. Like, he had read, like, the about page on Khan Academy. And he was just saying how he uses it himself. He uses it for his kids. And, I was like, what's going on here? And I remember going back to my wife, Umama, that night, and I said, I showed her the video, and I'm like, so what do I do? Do I call him? What's the protocol? How do I get his number? And they call. 2 weeks later, I'm about to record a video, and my cell phone rings. I see it's a Seattle number. I answer it. Hello? Hi, this is Larry Cohen. I'm Bill Gates' chief of staff. You might have heard that Bill's a fan. Like, yeah, I heard that. And if you're free in the next couple of weeks, we'd love to fly you up to Seattle and learn how we might be able to help support and collaborate with you. And I was looking at my calendar for the month and completely blank. And I said, yeah, maybe next Wednesday. I have to cut my nails, do some laundry, but I can meet with Bill. But we had that meeting, and it was very much like the meeting with Ann. And actually, at almost the exact same time, folks from Google had reached out. Some of y'all might remember this 10 to the 100th project when they had their 10-year anniversary in 2007. They said they were going to fund 5 projects with a total of $10 million that had the potential to change the world. And they had a change in leadership in the marketing, so it was taking time. But then finally in 2009, 2010, they said, oh, yeah, we made this promise. And the community told Google that one of those 5 projects should be in education. And they were looking for what is the project that they could give $2 million to that could be that. And then it just turned out that a lot of people at Google were already using Khan Academy. And so they reached out to me and they said, hey, tell me about your organization. I'm like, I'm just a guy in a closet about 3 miles up the road. But by fall of 2010, Gates Foundation and Google both contributed about $2 million each, which allowed us to become a real organization.
Okay. So let me start with a confession about math, right? So I was good at math, but more in an academic sense, right? So I mean, I scored well. So start my PhD, right? So started with data compression, and then by reading paper and eigenvectors, eigenvalues, and data compression. This is not what I know about eigenvectors. I mean, so you just solve the problems to get an A, right? So I mean, that's how it was, right? So in that moment, it occurred to me, I mean, why didn't they tell me this is what eigenvectors and eigenvalues are, right? So I mean, so applications, right? So my question here is, what do you think is broken about our education system? I mean, so why is it, particularly math and sciences, so people have this fear, right? So it is not for me. I don't have the gene for sciences and math, right? So what's broken? I mean, do you have any?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of them. I mean, what you just said is often cited, that people don't understand how to translate the abstract of what they're doing in the classroom to maybe why it might be relevant to their life. I do agree with that to some degree, but I actually think to some degree, have a little bit of a contrarian or more traditional, which is what's really happening, as I alluded to before, I saw this with my cousin, is as you move through a system that just gives you some lecture, some homework, and then gives you a test, and on that test, even if you get a 95%, What was the 5% you didn't know? And then, of course, we know that you might forget some of the even 95% that you did know. Those gaps accumulate, and at some point, and this, I think this room, we were the lucky ones that our gaps were so small that for the most part, algebra, we were fine with. Calculus, we were fine with. Maybe once we got to linear algebra, we started saying, eigenvectors, let's work it. But that got us far enough. But we also know many, many people in our own families, many of our friends, many of our kids' friends, that those gaps, if you really see why all of a sudden they're struggling in algebra or trigonometry, if you really sit and tutor them for an hour, you will realize it's because they're not fluent in their arithmetic. Or there's just a little in the trigonometry, they're not fluent enough in their algebra. And it just becomes frustrating. And then the reason why they start shutting down is honestly to protect their own self-esteem. And I saw this with my own cousins. As soon as you start feeling like you're fluent in it, you get good at it. As long as you can engage, you don't even have to feel like you're the best. Like I'm a 5'9" desi kid, but I still enjoyed PE. I never said, when am I going to have to take an orange ball and put it into a basket in real life? I never asked about applicability because I was engaged. I was, I was able to participate. But if I had so many gaps that I could not even engage in basketball, I would feel the same way. So I think the same thing is happening with math. If anything, most young people have a clear signal that math, if anything, and then science might be one of the most useful things in your life. In fact, they know that. They see all of y'all. They want to be in this room. But if you look at the number of students who want to be STEM majors when they enter college versus the number that actually succeed at becoming STEM majors, it's all because of this. They take those first few classes in calculus or physics, and they do badly.
And you have this this notion. You have talked about this quite a bit, and then you have your book, One World Schoolhouse Education, and you talk about mastery, not test scores, right? Mm-hmm. So, can you talk a little bit about what do you mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of times mastery learning is just the idea that you always have the opportunity and incentive to get better at something. It's arguably the oldest way of learning. Alexander the Great, when he's being tutored by Aristotle, if Alexander the Great was a little bit weak in military strategy, would not have said, oh, you have a B-, let's move on to how to handle the bureaucracy of the empire. Say, no, let's make sure you understand military strategy. It's the way that if anyone here has taken a piano class, I met a young man there who's great at tennis. If your forehand isn't good, your coach wouldn't say, okay, you're B-, let's perfect your forehand. The only reason why we don't do that in traditional school is 200 years ago we made a compromise. And a very utopian idea, free mass public education. And it was a good thing, but it had to be, you can't afford an Aristotle for everyone anymore. You had to batch students together, use some processes of the Industrial Revolution, move them together to set pace, apply some processes, and some people are going to get it, and they can go and be all of us. Some people are going to be the mid-level, and some people aren't going to get it, and they could be the unskilled labor. And that was kind of the process. But now, first of all, it's not acceptable. First of all, we know that wasn't equitable to begin with, but it's not acceptable in a world where we want more people to be in the knowledge economy. And the lucky thing is we now do have the tools where we don't have to make the compromise. Even if it's one teacher with 30 students, if they're able to use tools where every student can learn at their own time and pace, then you can start to approximate what a personal tutor would.
And do you think there is, so I know, I mean, in the US, so we have, let's say, certain education system, and then is there any country that you think it is closer to mastery-based learning as a course?
It's interesting because, yeah, people will look at Singapore and Finland, and first of all, I think those are completely unfair comparisons to the US. If you wanted to pick, Massachusetts actually has better scores than Finland. It's just if you compare, and Finland is smaller than the Bay Area in terms of population. It's half. So you're taking a small, homogeneous, wealthy country, and then you're comparing it to a large, diverse country like the US. Not a fair. And even China, they're comparing you to the subset of China that is actually they're actually testing. I actually say mastery learning is not making the American system more like the Finnish system or the Singaporean. It's actually making it more American. The reason why Silicon Valley is successful is because failure is not stigmatized. We all know, if you're in Pakistan, you're in India, you're in Bangladesh, you fail, people kind of look at you a little bit dirty, right? Like you're not, you're like, you might have trouble getting a wife, right? Like it's not, or a husband. But but in Silicon Valley, it's, as long as you failed reasonably, like you weren't, you know, it's almost a badge of honor. And that really fundamentally is mastery learning, that like, hey, failure is not something where you should just hide your head and go into a corner. It's something like, oh, I should learn from that, and I should do better the next time. And so our school system should not be stigmatizing failure either. If you fail an algebra exam, it doesn't mean you're dumb. It means you should keep working on your algebra. This is a kind of the psychology of entrepreneurship. And if you do that, it will help actually people have a more entrepreneurial mindset about their lives generally. I've had so many delegations from Singapore, from Finland, from China visit. We have a school, Khan Lab School. They visit our office. They're like, you know, what's going on? We're kicking your butt on test scores, but no one's starting these startups in our country. What's going on? And I tell them, I was like, you know, despite the fact that our school system is pretty closed-minded and pretty much fixed mindset and stigmatizes failure, the culture of the US, and in particular the culture of Silicon Valley, does not stigmatize failure as much. And that's what allows everyone here to take risks.
So before I go to the next question, so Q&A, yes, but I thought I had until 10, right? So like 45 minutes. So just to double check, right? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so one last question, and then just if you can talk very quickly about Khan Lab School, right? So I read about it that you don't assign letter grades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, what do tiger moms fret about, right? So I mean, that's all what they get upset about, right? So what do they have now, right? So and
Yes.
what is the KPI for progress now, right?
Yeah. So I think there's two things. I think actually we do believe in measurement. In fact, measurement, you need to measure anything in order to get better at it, as we all know. I think the difference, and it's actually, there's nothing wrong with letter grades. It's more of the notion that the letter grade should not be in stone. And it's an amazing change in psychology where, you know, we had a new teacher who was kind of the new computer science teacher, and there was a senior, and the senior had been evaluated as a freshman as approaching mastery, which isn't the highest level in our, you could kind of view it as a B. And the senior said, hey, I'm gonna go revisit it. I now know all of the stuff about algorithms. And that teacher thought, hey, is this cheating? We're letting them, and I was like, well, do you think that student knows the material? He's like, of course. He was just interning at NASA writing code for them. Of course he knows for loops now that he was a little bit weak in 9th grade. And then I was like, so what's actually wrong is that grade. That grade in the grade book that says he's a B or approaching mastery is false. You want it to be accurate. So let him show that he knows the material, have some type of task, and then up-level it. So nothing wrong. In fact, you have to evaluate and give, but it's always about being able to up-level it. In terms of the tiger parents, I mean, we all want the best for our kids and all of that. But I think the families that have taken a risk with us in the early days, and now we've had 2 or 3 graduating classes, going on to college and other things, is it's shown that when you do it this way, the students become more intrinsically motivated. They actually have more time and space because if they already know something, they don't have to sit and be bored. Everything that they're working on is actually relevant to them. They have more time to do projects. They're more collaborative because they don't feel like it's a zero-sum game. If you do better, I'm doing worse. And so these students are, one, I would say they're much less stressed than the same peers in some of the local schools here where we know it can be pressure cooker. They're learning the material more competently. And they're doing wonderful when they go to college, and they're succeeding there. Because actually in college, even though it has the trappings of a traditional system, at the end of the day, college expects you to learn all the material yourself. And these students are doing just fine in an independent setting like that. So I think the more people see that, they're feeling, oh, this is kind of working.
Great. So I had a few more things, but I will let it, yes, let's go ahead with the audience. Anyone has any? Please.
Hey Sal, Hassan here. Thanks again, firstly, for making Khan Academy. It's been very helpful for a lot of us people. What I wanted to know is that for us lucky few people, we get the chance to go to a 4-year educational institute, get a degree and everything. And even though the networking part of going to a university is really huge and getting all those connections and everything of that sort, but the educational part is still something that is, I feel like, replicated across universities and still to the core. You can't change physics or chemistry, right? Or some of the engineering concepts. So for the people who really can't afford or access universities, do you think there could be in the future a concept of a free university where these courses are put up online and actual degrees are made for people? So if you can't attend a university, you can maybe enroll in something of this sort to actually get the educational and a degree background that's vetted through. I think that's a possibility in the future sometime. Or maybe Khan Academy could do something like that.
Not just a possibility, we're working on it. So I'll tell you a couple of things that we're already doing, and then I can foreshadow a few things that might happen in the next year or two. So we already have a partnership. So this isn't this crowd, but like, it shows you the situation in the American school system, but it's actually true globally. A majority of kids who go to 2-year and 4-year institutions in this country have to take remediation. They don't even place into college algebra. College algebra is really algebra 2, which you should take in 10th or 11th grade at worst. And they get placed into 7th grade math. And this goes back to mastery learning. Even though they take algebra 1, algebra 2, and all this, they go to college, the college say, wait, you're not even ready to learn algebra yet. So we've been trying to solve that. We started a partnership with Howard University where it's a very small one right now, but we're going to scale pretty quickly, is we're going into Title I high schools, which are high schools of poverty in urban areas in the US. And if these students get mastery on Khan Academy, and essentially a version of our Algebra 2 college algebra course, Howard University is giving them transferable college credit in college algebra. Now, that's cool, but then it obviously, well, if it works for college algebra, why can't it work for pre-calculus, calculus, trigonometry, biology, chemistry, physics, software? I mean, I can keep listing courses, and you can see where this is going. So this is our intention, and you'll see some announcements probably in the next 6 months that it'll become very viable to get at least your first 2 years of college for free through exactly what you described, potentially leveraging Khan Academy. And I'm hoping in the next 3 to 5 years it will be all of your college can happen in that way. So, you know, you'll hear more. You'll hear more.
Yeah. Hi, this is Shahid Bhatti. So, Sal, when are we going to see Khan University coming up?
Yeah, well, just, you know, the thing I cannot announce just yet, but it is, we are partnering with a competency-based university, and you could probably try to figure out who that is because there aren't that many universities that are competency-based. But I think between our reach, the competency base, and everything I just described, you will start to see beginnings of that in the next year.
That's it.
Is it me? Hi.
Sorry.
So, my name is Rakan, and you know, one of the small things that you was mentioned in the talk was regarding what connectivity itself. So, kind of wanted to, and that's happened something that's a problem that I'm personally working on to address. So, this is a part of a slightly bit two-bit question, where one is, how do you believe that connectivity present now is something that you believe is stable or like is like dependable to continuously ensure that education protocols can be delivered to the US, even globally? And this follow-up to that second part of the question is there anything in the pipeline for the Khan Academy to get education to still the 3.5 billion who are unconnected in the world?
And the last part was for kids who are not connected?
No, as in globally, there's like 3.5 billion who
Yes.
are unconnected. So like, is there anything in the Khan Academy roadmap to reach those parts of the world despite limited or no connectivity
Right.
out there?
Okay. Yeah, you know, there's a couple of things. As we talked about, like the curve is pretty fast. You know, if we even look at the US, when I was just starting, even in US schools, it was hit or miss on whether they had connectivity. Now, in places like the US, even fairly low-income schools in the US, this classroom environment has connectivity. The pandemic put the spotlight on what goes on at home. Even if you have one device, that's still not sufficient because there could be the parents are using it and there's 2 or 3 kids at home. I'm hopeful, and you know, we've seen things like broadband prices. You know, we have a team in India, and we've seen that go down pretty significantly. So I'm, and obviously things like Starlink give us hope as well to get into pretty much everywhere where the governments allow it. So I feel like if we, I think there's a lot of room for us to ride on that trend. With that, and we're not like a super high bandwidth use. You know, we talked about the technology. We still operate to a large degree on not even 2007 technology on stuff that could have been around even in the late 90s in terms of streaming video, and our videos are actually not that high bandwidth. Some of that's pedagogical intention, but it also turns out that it's good for a reach point of view. Our team in South Asia has been saying, hey, are there ways that we could interact over WhatsApp and things like this that it would be even lighter weight, and you don't even need a high-powered phone to do it. We're exploring it, and before I was at first skeptical about things like WhatsApp because of like, well, how can you take something rich like Khan Academy and do it over a text-based interface? But I've been fascinated. We're starting to experiment with a lot of these large language models now, and I actually think we're closer than I would have guessed 6 months ago with the ability to leverage large language models for people to have a conversation potentially with Khan Academy. So I don't know when that's going to happen, a year from now, 3 years from now, but I think that could also be another, that's the dream. Let's imagine 5 years from now, any student in the world could have a WhatsApp conversation with their tutor, which is essentially Khan Academy. It seemed like science fiction to me even a couple of years ago, but I'm starting to see things that make me think that that's actually likely, not just.
So this is fascinating, right? So I can see that happen.
Yes.
So this absolutely.
थैंक यू सो मच आई एम डॉक्टर शाहिद कमर वो उर्दू में कहते हैं कि जहाँ पे आपका काम ख़त्म होता है हमारा वहाँ पे स्टार्ट होता है तो आई एम रनिंग ए नॉन
मेरा
प्रॉफिट
उर्दू इतना अच्छा नहीं है, लेकिन मेरा थोड़ा
यू गॉट द मैसेज
मैं बंगाली हूँ.
ओके So I'm running a non-profit. The purpose is to provide education to out-of-school children in developing countries. There are 300 million out-of-school children. They have two issues. One issue is the access. Access means that they do not have internet, they do not have electricity, and they do not have school. So that problem we resolved using technology in offline model. The other problem is content. So you solve the problem, content. The problem is the content is in English. So what we are trying to do, we are using open source content like Khan Academy and other academy. The problem we are dealing with, the people in Afghanistan, people in India, they do not know English. So we provide 5-year education in 1 year. So is there any appetite or any plan that you can create content in local language, like in Pashto, in Hindi, in Sindhi, so that local students between the age of 5 and 14, they can get education using their local language? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, that's one of our priorities from day one. When we got our first grant from Google, actually half of that first grant back in 2009, 2010 was for localization. And many of y'all know Bilal Musharraf was actually our first head of international at Khan Academy. The first localization that was ever done was actually in Urdu. It was done by Bilal, and that's where the idea even came from. And since then, that has grown into 50+ localization efforts around the world. So every language that you just mentioned actually does have an instantiation of Khan Academy. And the videos have been translated, and the platform, our platform does not support bidirectional yet. So that's where Urdu and Arabic and Hebrew and Farsi. We hope to be able to do that. Honestly, it's a resources issue. So if you know folks who want to support that type of stuff, let us know. But y'all would be interested. We're actually started in India, we've started formal partnerships. The state of Punjab is now using Khan Academy as an official resource. And the state of Punjab in India is actually translating. So you could go and have a complete Punjabi experience on Khan Academy. We're working with Uttar Pradesh. I mean, it's amazing because each of these states are like the size of a country, right? Uttar Pradesh is the size of Brazil, 20 million students. We're doing a very formal partnership with them. So we're hoping, and obviously we have less formal things going on in Pakistan and in Bangladesh and other places, but I hope that we can get to that same level of fidelity that we're starting to get some traction now in India. And India and Brazil and other parts of Latin America are where we have the most focused non-US, non-English things, but we hope that we can accelerate it all over the world.
Thank you. We are interested in partnering if we can do at some time.
Yeah, absolutely.
How much time do we have?
We have time for one more question.
One more question. So, yeah.
Hi. Sorry to everyone who also wanted to ask a question. I know you guys are also desperate, so I'm gonna keep it short. First of all, huge fan, Salkhan. I've I mean, I use Khan Academy like every other week, and I also participated in the Breakthrough Junior Challenge.
Oh yeah.
So I'm very, very fond of your work, and I look up to your work, and I read all about you all the time. So I actually started homeschooling recently, and I think the whole idea of Khan Academy is about independent work because, as you said, the schooling system is about helping the masses, right? So you can't have everyone doing work as they can on their own pace. So how can people in general form a dedication and a consistency with work when they're doing independent schooling, so that they are on pace and they're at least, in fact, if they're able to advance instead of falling behind when they're doing independent schooling?
Yeah, no, excellent question. And actually what you just zeroed in on is the core issue. A lot of people think to reform education, you have to have fancier technology or fancier standards or this or that. But really, it's all about motivation. Because honestly, even 30 or 40 years ago, if you were motivated enough, you could go to the library, take a dense textbook, and just try to power through it. Now, what we hope is things like Khan Academy have done, and the internet has done in general, but hopefully Khan Academy is part of it. If it was this hard to engage with the textbook, we've now lowered the activation energy. So it's easier and easier. But we still know that we do have examples of young people all over the world. You know, Khan Academy is all they needed, and they're off to the races. And I mean, some of these stories would put tears to your eyes. Girls in Afghanistan who have taken onto Khan Academy, and now they're quantum computing researchers in the US. And I mean, there's this young girl, Sultana, it would blow your mind. Orphan girls in Mongolia who use it to educate, you know. So there are people in the world who are that motivated, and you give them Khan Academy, they're off to the races. But there may be sub 1%, sub 5% of the population. So a lot of what we try to think about is, we think the tools are there, the pathway is there, even the credentials are going to be there soon. How do we motivate more and more people? That's why we work closely with classrooms, because at the end of the day, that classroom environment, that teacher environment, it is what's going to motivate the most students. But we also try to do models where the students can motivate each other. We have another not-for-profit called schoolhouse.world that you'd probably really enjoy, where it's free tutoring. Everyone here can participate as either to get tutoring or to be a volunteer. And we vet the tutors, and most people will tell you that it's better tutoring than you can pay for, but you're getting tutoring from potentially other high school students and things like that. And so we're thinking about what types of systems can we create that automatically drive more and more motivation, whether it's inside of the classroom, through the traditional system, through the credentials, or through social things. And I'll say one last thing, which is, we also want to revisit different types of credentials. So on schoolhouse.world, this other sister nonprofit of Khan Academy we started, you have to certify your knowledge, and we have a mechanism for doing that, leveraging Khan Academy. And then you get a tutor reputation. And over the last 2-3 years, University of Chicago, MIT, Georgia Tech, Case Western have all said, they've all added it to their application, we'd like to see your schoolhouse.world profile. Now, why do they say that? Is because traditionally, you admit kids with a high SAT score, you got a 5 on Calculus AP, that's okay. But if you could tutor Calculus AP, if you're one of the top tutors in the country of physics, that's the student you want on your campus, because not only do they clearly know the material, but they can communicate, they have empathy, they're giving their time to other people. So I actually see things like that as the true credential of the future. If you're a great teacher, if you're a great tutor, that's who you want at your company, not just the person with the great test score.
Absolutely. So Sal, we can continue going because 45 minutes was absolutely not enough, right? So, but I see your staff waiting for us, and we don't.
I have no staff, so I don't know who's waiting.
Yeah, but really, thank you so much, Sal. It was a distinct privilege for me.
Thank you.
Personally. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a bunch.
Thank you.
Yeah.